Hey everybody, welcome to A Mighty Blaze. I'm Jenna Blum, one of the co-founders of The Blaze, and I am very thrilled you are all joining us here for an extremely special interview with our guest, Alyson Richman. Alyson, welcome back to The Blaze.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Jenna. I'm so thrilled to be here.
We're so excited to have snared you back into our blazy little clutches. So for those of you who are returning Blazers, thank you for watching. Thank you for bringing your light to our blaze. For those of you who might be new here, please know we are a team of about 30 creative professional volunteers. Blaze started when we were linking authors and their readers during COVID, when the pandemic canceled in-person book tours. Obviously, we have gone long beyond COVID now. We are on Facebook, we are on YouTube, we are on TikTok, we are on Substack, we're on Twitter, which I refuse to call X. If you like what you see here, please give us a like or a follow and share. Also, please consider signing up for our newsletter at www.amightyblaze.com so you'll never have literary FOMO ever again, and no more FOMO, nobody likes that. And without further ado, I am going to introduce today's guest, who is here to talk about her beautiful new novel, The Missing Pages. So, Allie, are you ready for your bio?
I am. Go. Cast away.
Okay, buckle up. It's you. Alyson Richman is the USA Today bestselling and #1 international bestselling author of 14, right?
No, this is my 11th. Yeah, I'm working on my 12th. Well, if you include the anthologies, then it is 14.
Exactly. Okay, right.
I don't normally count the anthologies, but if you do, yes, it is 14.
I absolutely count anthologies. Of course, you put in the time, you wrote the stories, you contributed. Yes. So when I counted the book covers, I was not wrong. But I also write fiction. So I'm like, Alyson has written 370 novels. She has written 14 works of historical fiction, including The Velvet Hours, The Garden of Letters, The Lost Wife, The Thread Collectors, The Secret of Clouds, and the gorgeous book we are here to talk about today, The Missing Pages. Guys, look at this cover. We're going to talk about this cover later. I'm so in love with it. Alyson graduated from Wellesley, just down the road from moi, with a degree in art history and Japanese studies. And it's no surprise to anybody who has read and loves Alyson's work that her art informs her use of language, which we'll also talk about. Allie's novels have been published in 25 languages and reached bestseller lists both in the US and abroad. She lives on Long Island in a beautiful house that I invite myself to periodically and stay for longer than anybody should stay, and yet she allows me to. And she has 2 gorgeous children, a very kind husband, and an adorable dog named Tofu. And when Allie's done touring with The Missing Pages, she will be at home, where she is at the moment, I think, finishing her next historical novel. So again, welcome.
Well, thank you for such a beautiful introduction, Jenna. You just make me smile a lot.
Good. And if you guys hadn't picked this up by now, Allie and I are really old friends. Now, I don't just invite myself to her house randomly. We met in 2014 when we both contributed to an anthology called Grand Central, which was all stories set on the same day in September 1945. Hi, Tori, when America was coming home from the war. And we've been fast friends ever since. And I am delighted to have any chance to gaze upon my beautiful and talented friend, whose dress sense I always greatly admire. Like, I'm always dressed like a cleaning person, and Allie is always wearing some gorgeous dress. So this is like a little extra bonus of our friendship. Eye candy. Okay, so tell us about The Missing Pages. For those who have not yet had the pleasure of reading this book, what is Missing Pages about?
So The Missing Pages is a book that explores the legend of Harry Elkins Widener, who was a 27-year-old book collector from a Gilded Age family who boarded the Titanic carrying a very rare and precious book. And there's this legend surrounding him that he went back to his cabin to retrieve this book and did not get on the lifeboat with his mother. His mother, 2 years later, after his death, decided to create an incredible library for him at Harvard, his alma mater, called the Harry Elkins Widener Memorial Library. And in this library, there is a special memorial room for him that is sort of a loose reconstruction of his office with oak carved shelves, his original his book collection on these shelves, a portrait of him over the mantle, his original desk and chairs. And in Eleanor Widener's behest to the library, she stipulated that every week fresh flowers needed to be put on his desk in order to conjure up the sensation that her son at any moment might come into the room, pull one of his beloved books off the shelf, and sit down to read at his desk. So when I heard this legend, my daughter actually informed me about after she took a tour at Harvard, I immediately thought this would be an incredible novel because, first of all, you have this torque between mother and son, this incredible scene where a mother is desperately trying to get her son onto her lifeboat and to save him. And then you also see the son who desperately wants to give his mother a gift of hope that he just might be on the next lifeboat, even though he's, in my mind, when I first heard the legend, he's staying back to be a gentleman. I wasn't sure if there was a book that he might have gone back to retrieve. So I started to research, what that book was. There was, in fact, a book that was so priceless that he possibly did go back to his cabin. But the novelist in me was like, wouldn't it be incredible to write the novel from his perspective as a ghost inside the library his mother built in his honor, giving Harry himself the chance to inform in his own words what really happened in those last moments when the Titanic was, struck this iceberg. So that's a very large part of the missing pages. And then there is a dual timeline with Violet Hutchins, who is this sophomore at Harvard who has suffered her own personal loss. And she finds herself employed as a page inside the Widener Library. And the space itself becomes a place of healing for her as she starts to read the letters of Harry Widener for one of the librarians who has asked her to do some research for them. She also starts to feel that the ghost of Harry Widener is trying to communicate to her and trying to perhaps tell her to go on a journey to find an untold chapter of his story. So there's two storylines, but it's, for me, like my first ghost story, it's a love story, it's a historical novel, and it's, based in your backyard, Jenna, in Harvard Square.
I can read the Widener from my house. Not really, but if I were across the river, I would be able to do that. And I feel as though, for those of you who are in New England, Allie is speaking at 7 p.m. at the Harvard Bookstore this Friday, interviewed by moi in person. I feel like we should just trot across the street to the Widener Library and you could give us a little tour, everybody who is there. So I just wanted to point out to all of you, this is based on a true story. It's extrapolated from a true story, which I think is so extraordinary. And that's one of the things I wanted to ask about. How do you write about a real person like Harry Widener and his mother, and all of these tangibilities that we can still put our hands on in the library? How do you do this? Just the chutzpah of it, and what responsibility do you feel to the real people? I guess that's what I'm asking is, how do you navigate that responsibility?
Absolutely, because he is a real person, and his mother Eleanor, and his father George, who was also aboard the Titanic, they were all real life people with their own stories, their own histories. And I think Jenna, that when you're writing his historical fiction, you have to do your due diligence. You have to do your research. Otherwise, your readers feel betrayed. I think when you're reading historical fiction, you want to know that the novelist has really combed the archives and tried to understand as much information that is out there and find a way to thread that into the novel, that it doesn't feel didactic, but by the time you finish the novel, you've learned something about people who really lived in this world and contributed, and that you feel that you're enriched after you finish the last page. So the first thing I did when I heard this legend was try and find out, was there any truth that there could be a book so rare and precious that Harry did risk his life to go back to his cabin to find it? That was my first initial question. And that took me to London, to Quaritch Limited, which is the existing bookstore that Harry visited when he went to London on his book buying excursion. He met with Bernard Quaritch, who was the son of the original founder of the store, and he purchased several rare books from Bernard. On top of that, he did purchase what's called the Little Bacon. It was a 16th century copy of Francis Bacon's essays that is supposedly, it was like the size of a baseball card. It could fit in the palm of your hand.
Cool.
And there is still existing letters in the archives at Quaritch Limited Harry writing, to Quaritch, saying what he wanted to buy, what he wanted to see. And then after the sinking of the Titanic, Bernard actually wrote to A.S.W. Rosenbach, who was the beloved and mentor of bookseller of Harry in Philadelphia. And in that letter, which I touched and I read, which was so incredible, he says that when Harry was leaving his bookstore, having purchased the Little Bacon, it was, the only one that he did not have sent back home. He was taking it with him. And he told Bernard that he wanted to keep it in the pocket of his dinner jacket, just in case he was shipwrecked, he'd have something to read. And Quaritch went on to say to Rosenbach, if a body is found that has a book inside the dinner jacket, it could be used to identify Harry. And he wanted him to, to inform him of that last conversation they had. So I did know there was a very special book that he was carrying. Of course, the question was it on his person or was it back in the cabin? Did he tell this mother? Did he tell this to his mother? He had to go back to his cabin because he did just want to give her hope. He wanted to make sure she was saved and her lifeboat was lowered safely into the Atlantic. But that in itself, that emotional scene between mother and son, I kept on returning to. And I think I found it so meaty because, as a novelist, to be able to see a story in multiple directions is interesting. To see this from the perspective of a son desperate to sort of, make his mother and his last moments with her feel, hopeful. And then also from the mother's perspective, who, even if her son is 27 years old, he's still her child and she desperately wants to save him. I was so emotionally connected to that scene. And so it was building around that and learning about who the Widener family was. I think one of the really interesting things I discovered right away was that they were the epitome of the American dream. Harry's grandfather was a completely self-made man. He was a butcher who sold mutton to the Union troops during the Civil War, made his fortune that way, then invested in the burgeoning transportation system of Philadelphia with trolley cars. And then he invested in U.S. Steel and then other industries. And his fortune just grew and grew and grew. And then he started collecting priceless works of art. Harry began collecting books because he loved to read. And, this, Jenna, when you're writing historical fiction, there are certain building blocks that you need to know that sort of become the armature of how you're going to create your story and give structure to it and inform your reader. And then you start applying layer of molding your characters and what their hearts are and their souls and their emotions. But in the beginning, it's about learning that sort of topography of who they are, where they came from, who were the influences in their life, and then creating a narrative that readers are going to want to, fall into the next page, the next chapter.
Beautiful. You are braver than I am because you do write about real people. I always make up my people, but when I'm writing historical fiction, I have the scaffolding of what actually happened, and that's where my research has to be meticulous. The architecture is meticulously built and really strongly built, and then I kind of layer in the personal story among the bones of what really happened. But I'm always curious when I interview authors what the genesis of the story is. And I think it surprises readers sometimes to know it isn't the first page of the book. And again, I always say this, like, we're not Snoopy on the doghouse sitting and typing, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, and then everything rolls out from there. It's usually a much more beautifully chaotic and messy process. And I'm wondering if you, like me, have some scene or a paragraph that you're writing toward. Like, for every book, I have kind of like the reward scene that I'm writing toward that's the heart of the book for me. And depending on where the placement is in the book, then I sort of earn it by writing everything else that leads up to it and then goes beyond it. And I'm wondering if you have that. And if so, is it the scene with Harry and his mom on the lifeboat?
It has to be, because it's that story that I heard first that made me sort of really curious to learn more about who Harry was and whether there was a book there and what was his relationship with his mother and how did his mother heal from the grief afterwards. I mean, that she creates this incredible library for him with this memorial room that literally when you walk in, there's all this white marble in the atrium of the library. There's a center staircase that leads up to his room that's framed by a threshold, and everything is sort of white except for the room that you see at the top of the the staircase. And it's this varnished wood that's so rich, almost like oxblood red. And you see his portrait illuminated by light. And it just feels like an eternal flame. It feels like it's the beating heart of the library. And you can see how his mother really felt that his spirit inhabited this space, that it was a sacred space with his books, and that it should always be lit, and it should always be, treated with reverence, and it should be vital. It should be alive with flowers. It's not a dead space at all. It's an active space. So it was the first scene that drew me in, and I knew that was going to be sort of the emotional crescendo of the novel. But there was also this sort of elliptical emotions around that scene of mother and son, and how we channel grief, and how a library can become not just a space of healing for his mother, who funds this and creates it, but then decades later, students who are going into this library, like Violet Hutchins in 1992, almost 100 years later, how this becomes a space of healing for her as well. And so there's, I guess, with every book, and that might be what you're trying to say, you're writing towards a scene, but everything, it's like a solar system is orbiting that, and eclipsing it, and traveling around it, and it's about navigating all of that in order to get you completely, to turn the next page, to learn more, and to make every page interesting. It's not like you can build a novel just around one scene.
Right, totally right. For me, it's like the secret reward is getting to write that scene, and it is the emotional sun for me that the rest of the book orbits around. But of course, the rest of the planets have to be equally vibrant and equally enticing. That's what makes a system, as opposed to just one thing. And I'm always trying to think, when I read a book, like, where did this come from? Like, what is the emotional beating heart of the story for the author? When you were at the Widener, did you get vibes? Like, did you get Harry vibes? Did you feel him there, in addition to like the obviously sort of palpable love for her son that his mother had?
Did I actually feel Harry's presence? So much so. I mean, the space is such a calm and beautiful space. It is roped off by sort of velvet ropes now. But I was very lucky to get a tour from one of the librarians there, so I could go deeper into the space. I think another beautiful thing about the space is that Harry's grandfather wrote to him while he was, away in London, saying that he had just purchased a Gutenberg Bible for his book collection, and would be waiting there when he got back from his trip to London after he docked on the Titanic. And we know that never happened. The family years later donated the Gutenberg Bible, and it's on display in the room. So there is like this, glass encased pedestal with the, open Bible there as well, which is really special because it basically is in the mind's eye of the portrait. So Harry is looking down at that as well. So when you go in, there is this just a really warm feeling of family and love and books and, connection. And I think you'd be hard pressed for anyone to stand at the threshold of that room and not be deeply moved.
Meanwhile, the librarians at the library are wondering why there's a sudden stampede of people going to the library. They're like, wow, we have never been so popular. What is even happening?
And I should say, you can't enter it without someone who is a Harvard student. You do need someone to chaperone you. I was obviously able to go on research purposes and to go that way, but I think there are going to be a lot of people who just go through the bronze, door and think that they can just walk into his memorial room, and that's not the case.
Understood. But what a beautiful monument. When you think about mausoleums and how cold they are, or even the most beautiful gravestones and grave sites, like this sounds like a living memorial. A constantly refreshed memorial. So this is a different direction for you, in some sense, writing from the point of view of a ghost. And I'm wondering what that was like for you. Did it give you certain freedoms and challenges that writing about flesh and blood historical people didn't?
I joke around that writing from the perspective of Harry's ghost in this novel was, like finding the ultimate omniscient narrator. It was so much fun to use his lens to tell this story, because he obviously is a very reliable narrator. He lived what happened on the Titanic, the way I write it. So his voice is very commanding, and you feel that he is literally speaking his truth of what happened in those last moments. But there's also this very soulful aspect of his voice that I think would have been really difficult to do in a regular character if they had been someone who was just, as you said, flesh and bones living in this day. The fact that he's a spirit gives him this incredible wisdom and calm that I think makes you feel very pulled into the story, and in a way fall in love with him, because he does seem to have so much sensitivity and wisdom the way I wrote him. He knows what happened in the past, but he's still very much present, in the present, and he can observe what's going on. And in the case of having a connection to Violet, later as you get deeper into the novel, you understand why he has this connection, why he's chosen her to sort of find this unknown part of his story. He is so compassionate. He wants her to heal. He feels her grief. He knows what it's like to have watched decades of people grieving, decades of people entering his library, moving through the space. I mean, one of the most, for me, poignant chapters that I wrote for the Missing Pages is when he observes his mother grieving for him in the days after the Titanic has sank and he has drowned, and wanting desperately to be able to give her a sign that he's still there. And, I don't know if, I'm sure everyone who is listening today has lost someone, unfortunately, in their life at some point. And I think when we have a loss like that, we are always looking for little signs that they are still with us. And so wouldn't it be wonderful if you had confirmation of a ghost that actually, almost like a marionette, they're doing these things on purpose, just so you know that they're still there. And, that scene with the birds, that's what I was doing. It's just showing how he wants to let the people he loves know he's still there surrounding them.
I always think that cardinals are signs from my mom. I have heard other people say that too. I'm welcoming our audience to put in the chat, if you've lost somebody, what signs do they send you? Because I think that's such a powerful thing. And let's talk about the Titanic a little bit too. So in this book, you have this very brave and beautiful portraiture of the point of view of a ghost, and just channeling the gentle, book-loving soul that is Harry Widener. Then you also are tackling maybe the best known tragedy of the last century. It's just been immortalized in so many books and movies, and the James Horner soundtrack that I keep posting everywhere and that gets stuck in my head that I could sing if anybody really wants me to. And I'm wondering, did that feel intimidating? And if so, how did you get past feelings of writing about the Titanic?
So yes, I mean, the Titanic was incredibly intimidating to research because there is so much out there. And also that scene that we talked about between mother and son, there was so much chaos going around at that moment. You have people desperate to get on lifeboats. You have, different people on the ship who are trying to get people into them and to lower them into the ground. And then there's the whole, what's the word? Like the mapping of the Titanic, how many decks there were and where people were going to be coming from, and north, south, east, west. I mean, I have terrible sense of direction. So there was just the logistics of that to master. It was very difficult for that scene. Another thing which I was very conscious of in writing this book was that, so many of us are familiar with the Titanic. I mean, when you say that word, it conjures up so many different things for different people. And if you've seen the movie, like we always joke about Jack and Rose and things like that, you have something pressed in your mind from it. I mean, I have a memory of just being probably in second or third grade and combing through my dad's bookshelf, and he had A Night to Remember. And I can still see sort of like the illustration on the cover with the iceberg and the ship, even the paper on it, and wanting to read it and learning about all these different people who had been on the boat, and they each had a really interesting story, and just being so hungry to know who were these people who boarded this boat. Every person had a story, right? Whether they survived or they didn't survive, leading up to the moment they entered the gangplank, to the, if they were lowered into a lifeboat, or if they drowned, they all had a story. So there is a fascination with that. Doing the research, I tried to constantly have this dance with myself with the research of, if I learned something new, I wanted to somehow put it in the book, because I thought that's would make the scene more interesting, rather than just repeating things that we all do know. Like, we all have a working knowledge of what happened. But for example, I remember reading in one book, everything smelled so new. It was the smell of freshly polished brass. There was a smell of fresh paint still when you were being led to your first class cabin. And that really struck out to me, that sense of smell of newness. I mean, we knew it was like its, debut launch, but we didn't, the smells associated, that really struck me. And I wanted to make those scenes very sensory rich, that you felt that you were walking in the hallways of it, or that every first class cabin had a theme, like an interior decorating theme. You could choose the Louis 15th. Harry chose the Renaissance theme, for his furniture. That was sort of new to me too. So those details I loved discovering, and then finding a fresh way to put them in the book.
How did you discover new details about the Titanic? I feel like I, like you, had that Night to Remember fascination. My mom loved that book. I still remember the cover with the ship lit up and then sinking. I mean, now we know inaccurately, but it was broken in half. But on the cover, it was, like this.
Right.
And I also grew up watching the Poseidon Adventure. So I'll never go on a cruise because of these movies and these books. But I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I have read about and seen Titanic, and I think about Lightoller saying, "I'll shoot you all like dogs." I read all the transcripts. So how do you find new details about this?
Well, they're new to me, Jen. I mean, obviously it was when I was reading and I didn't know it, it sort of came out in high relief to me. It's not that I personally discovered, in some sort of archaeological excavation, something about the
Titanic. In a submarine.
When I was reading, I was just like, I didn't know that. That's interesting. Okay, right. I'd love to put that, that there was a gymnasium and a Turkish bath. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know about the steam rooms either. I didn't know about that.
Right. So those things were so interesting to me, that I wanted to find a way to put them in when I was setting the stage for, in the hours before, the tragedy happened.
I'm guessing that you probably didn't take like a submersible all the way down to the ocean floor to look. So I'm wondering how you did your research. Was it mostly book research? Was it?
So it was mostly book research, looking at photographs and menus and things before, it launched. There was also a lot of National Geographic documentaries that are now available about the sinking and what happened. And, people like, young John Thayer, who survived. He did stay behind. He went to the same high school that Harry went to. They knew each other from Philadelphia. He wrote a whole accounting of having stayed behind and then having survived and being pulled up into a lifeboat. So his, memories of that were really vital too, and how I created Harry's last moments.
Mm-hmm. If you were on board with Harry, like having dinner, it's like a Titanic quiz now. One thing I'm going to ask that's kind of factual, like, what would you have been eating? Because I'm always thinking about food, as we both are, in the first class dining area. And then what question would you ask him if it was just you and he?
Ooh, those are good questions. So, well, I would be definitely having some really great seafood. I think I would be having oysters for my appetizer. And then I would be having some sort of fish, I think, and some lovely, steamed vegetables. That's what I would probably choose. And then profiteroles for dessert. I do have the Titanic cookbook, which is based on the a la carte menu that was available to the wealthiest who were booking in the special dining room, where everything, as I said, was a la carte. So that's why I know what I've just said was available. And what I would ask him would be, It's funny. I would ask him if there was one book that you would save, what book would it be from your library? And it would not be contained to just what he had just purchased in London. It would be for, his nearly 3,000 volumes that he had in his collection. What one book would be the most precious one for him, and why?
What would you go back for? What book would you go back for if you were on the Titanic?
It would be a sentimental book. I have a book that I call it my grandma book. And it is, do I have it here? I do have it. Maybe that isn't it. No, this is a different one. I thought it was, but it's not. My grandmother has a book of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam that's in my book, and it's Eleanor's favorite book. And my grandmother was born in 1917, and this book was probably around that time. It's an edition of it, and it's in a beautiful sleeve, and it's beautiful. And I would probably go back for that because I know my grandmother gave that to me before she died. It's funny that the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam was not only, like, we know Eleanor Elkins Widener loved this book, and she had an edition that was emerald green with gold foil. It's in my book, and mine's not as luxuriant looking. But there was a second book on the Titanic that went down with it that was never found. That was a jeweled encrusted version of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. It was embellished with tourmalines, golden and turquoise, peacocks embossed into it. It was done by the publisher and bindery Sutcliffe and Sargosky, and it was en route to go to New York to be, it was bought at auction. And there is another legend with Harry that he was shepherding that book to go through customs, that he was asked to do that. So that plays into the plot. So there are two precious books that we know definitively went down on the Titanic. One is this jewel encrusted one, and then one is Harry's 16th century Little Bacon.
That's amazing. How extraordinary to think about books as works of art in that way. I mean, we all know, at least I hope everybody here knows, that books are works of art, that usually it's the ephemera that gets channeled through the writer onto the pages. And it's why I still like to read, I like to read actual books that I can hold in my hand. I feel like you take something from the air and you make it into something physical. And that is an object of art. It's a work of art. But I rarely think about books being actually jewel encrusted, which greatly appeals to my New Jersey bling sensibilities. I'm like, I think we should all have jewels on the covers.
Bedazzled books.
Bedazzled books, right. If I ever start Blaze Publishing, all the covers are going to be bedazzled. You heard it here first, people. And yes, we asked Robin's favorite question about your favorite treasure on your bookcase. So thank you for answering that. I love that. I think of this book as a love letter in so many ways. I think of it as a love letter from Harry's mom to Harry, from Harry to there's a secret love in the book. And I don't think I can say much more about that without spoilers. But it's a love letter to love in that sense. And if you guys want to know more, you have to buy the book, obviously, the book. And then a love letter to books and libraries, and the way books and libraries draw people together, even across centuries and generations. And I'm wondering, if you had to choose what this book is a love letter to, what would you say?
I think it's a love letter to the connection that books forge, and one of the things with this dual timeline is that the same reason that Harry was drawn to books and what they meant for him, and that connection that in 1912 you're seeing with the female bookseller that comes into his life that is part of the love story, is the same connection that Violet feels for books, that she first has this connection with her grandmother, with her boyfriend, Hugo, and then later on when she's just healing within the space of Widener Library, that there is always a connection between the written word and the reader, that it can sing to one's soul, it can bridge a connection, it sparks conversation. Stories do bond us to each other. So to me, it's this love letter of the connection of books, and that connection bridges so much in this novel, because it's not just about reader to author. It's between people who all love to read, between readers everywhere, and between, and this sort of sacred bond that we have when we are transported by the written word and find universal connections. And I think in this divisive world today, like, we need that more than ever.
I love that. I remember that when I first moved to Boston and I didn't know anybody outside of my writing program, whenever I was feeling blue, I would walk to the Borders that was near my apartment. That was back in the day when Borders was still a thing. And I knew that even if I didn't speak to a single soul in that bookstore, we were all connected because we were all there for the love of books.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think about when I'm traveling by myself on book tour and I go down to the restaurant, I always have a book with me. So when I have my dinner, I can read my book, and that keeps me, having my own companion, and I can put it down and I can pick it up and I can fall into the pages. And I think about my first date with my husband, and we started talking about books, and we discovered that we both loved Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and that became like the next hour of our conversation. And it was that, flicker of connectivity. Books can be a conduit between us and a new person, a new soul. And it's just, how it multiplies and how it forges these connections. I think it's beautiful.
I did not know that about you and Stephen.
Yes. And then actually, when I was pregnant with my son, he read a chapter of 100 Years of Solitude every single night to me when I was pregnant. And then, 3 days before Zachary was born, he got to the last chapter, which both of us had forgotten that a baby is born with a tail in the last chapter. So I remember he was like, maybe I won't read the last chapter. But yeah, it was a very romantic courtship because of that book. And so, that's that type of romance, bookish romance, is part of the missing pages, and you see it with Violet and Hugo in the beginning, and then you see it with Harry and Ada. So it's eternal.
It is. And then there are people of the book and people not of the book. I went on a date last year, I want to say, with an extremely eligible bachelor who was a lovely, lovely soul. And I got to his house and like, oh, I understand why I don't have any connection with you. There are no books here. There were no books in his house. And as soon as I realized that, I thought, oh, this just isn't going to work. I'm so sorry. There's something that is so essential to that form of communication. It's a particular kind of soul. So yes, I'm like a book love snob. If you're a book love snob, you will love this book. Absolutely. Okay, I am monopolizing you. Karen, our wonderful producer, has been looking over your questions in the chat. If you do have questions for Ali, this is the time. But meanwhile, Karen, do you mind popping up what we do have? So from Tori Whitaker, who is an amazing historical novelist in her own right. Tori says, the book cover is spectacular. I totally agree. The flowing gown, which at second glance reveals pages, which then gives the ghostly sense. How did you respond when seeing the first mock-up? I'll just hold it up a little bit closer to the screen so you guys can see.
I think Jenna knows it wasn't the first mock-up.
Definitely not the first mock-up. No, you want to tell that story? I think it's a great story.
It is a good story. So, and I can tell this story with a good sense of humor. And should the designer be listening, he knows that he triumphed in the end and did a beautiful, beautiful cover. But the first version of my cover did not look like that. It was a green background with a very toned young woman in a white, like Banana Republic like dress with maybe some at her hem. It might have been pages, but I'm not sure. And a very bold font. And I saw the cover and I literally broke out into hives. Like I had like an allergic reaction to it, because for me, it didn't look anything like Violet, who loves to dress in pre-Raphaelite dresses, flowery dresses. And it's sort of an old soul, even though it's 1992. And it certainly wasn't Gilded Age Titanic. So I had a conversation with my editor, who also agreed that, it didn't, conjure up the atmosphere of this novel. And she said, but sales really loves this idea of a dress made out of pages. And I said, you know what, to be fair, it's a brilliant idea. I love the idea, but it just doesn't feel like the book. So what I did is I started combing through different portraits that were done during the Gilded Age. And I found, this is a John Singer Sargent painting of Nancy Astor. I found this, and I could see the way that the gown rippled at the end, that you could manipulate that and create pages. And so I sent that to the design team and said, you need a gown like this, not thinking they'd be able to get permission to use the painting, but they were. And then he just did this brilliant job. I mean, I love the sort of graphite background, the bronzy letters. And even if you look at the spine, there's a little Titanic on the spine that is really very charming. So it's very, very beautiful. And the quality of like there's like a shimmer to it, which makes it very luminous. He just knocked it out of the park in the second go. But we did not get there the first time. And a lot of my arcs, the initial arcs, have the first cover, which if you can find it online, you'll see why I was not happy the first time. But I'm so joyous now.
I love the journey of this. And I don't know how many readers know that authors don't often have that much of a say in their covers. So it was great that you were such an active participant and came up with this really unusual, really eye-catching, very thematic, just like luscious cover. Like I have cover envy looking at this, and I actually like my own new cover. But
you have a beautiful cover. Yeah.
My cover puts its foot on the accelerator and kind of revs, and that's what it's supposed to do for a book called Murder Your Darlings. It's a little different, but it is such a fraught thing. Like I remember talking about this last time I was visiting you, that like Allie showed me the Banana Republic cover, which is what we were thinking of, like the first draft. I was like, this looks like something from the Golden Girls era. It was like very nice.
I met a librarian who saw it, and she said it looks like someone who just divorced her husband in Mississippi and now is heading out west. And I was like, yeah, that is what it looks like. It doesn't look like a Titanic Gilded Age novel. And what I love about the one that's out now, the finished copy, is that it does seem unique to other covers that are out there. It's not manipulated to seem modern. It's gloriously old-fashioned looking, right? It's just so timeless that way.
And gives a beautiful sense of era. So anybody looking at it right away will probably be drawn to the dress, as I was, and then to the pages, and then think, oh, this is a book about the Gilded Age, the Gilded Age era. And I just did such a beautiful job with it. And if you guys do get your hands on that original galley, it's now a collector's item. You could sell for thousands of dollars on eBay. I'm sure, but don't do that. Just like keep it in, You can take it on a cruise with you, and if the ship goes down, you can go back and get that galley. Anyway, I think this book is so gorgeous, and I just realized I grabbed my arc of the new cover, so I was looking at the spine, going, I don't see the ship. But if you guys have the actual new book, you can see the ship on the spine. Yes.
You don't see it on the top because I think you have I think I can tell you don't have the arc.
Oh yeah, I do actually.
So no, on the very tip in the border is like a little ship.
Tiny.
And actually, the border that they did around is based on the border of Harry's Ex Libris adhesive that was in all of his the plates that were in all of his book collections. They used that for the border, which was a really nice detail.
I just think it's so respectful. It's very respectful of your story, and it's very respectful of Harry's story. And I love it when cover designers have that attention to detail, that level of it, because it's such an act of love then. And I have to say, like, cover designers, my hat is off to you. You have to deal with authors, our very specific visions, our pronounced neuroses, and our stage mom determination to get the covers right. So you guys.
I think it always also goes back to, is this a book you as the author would have picked up in the bookstore? And so you have to feel that it is. And so it's very personal, your immediate reaction to this. Like, are you personally drawn to this cover? And if not, you're going to have a problem.
Yeah, right. And I always think it's like somebody dressing your child, except the clothes are permanent. So if somebody takes your baby and puts it in like weird Oshkosh overalls, when you're like, that actually is not what my baby would ever, it's like stuck to them forever. So anyway, you got a gorgeous cover for a gorgeous book. Karen, do we have more audience questions? Interesting. Some of your books have been collaborations. What was that process like? Great question.
Yes. So I have done 2 novels that are collaborations, The Thread Collectors, which I talked about on The Blaze with Jenna. And that is a Civil War novel about 2 Union musicians in the army during the Civil War, one Black and another one who is Jewish, and this unexpected friendship on the battlefields of Louisiana. Writing that with Shauna Edwards was such a spectacular experience. I learned so much about her history, about language itself, and how we can each hear, words differently, depending on our own personal backgrounds. And I loved writing that with her. And then the other book that I did was with an author, M.J. Rose, who passed away last year, and the Swedish novelist Sofia Lundberg. We wrote a book called The Friday Night Club. Yeah, I know. About the Swedish artist Hilma af Klint and her creative circle. They met every Friday night and tried to have seances with the other world and channel that into Hilma's artwork. And that too was a wonderful experience. I love doing it. I wrote both during COVID, and I think that was like the perfect time to work on collaborations with creative people, because we were all housebound, and it gave me a connection outside the home of creativity and learning about something new. But lately I have been focusing on, just my solo projects, but I do want to do another one with Shauna. We have an idea that we're working towards in the future. So I will be doing it at some point.
Oh, I eagerly look forward to that. It was such a treat to interview both of you and to read Thread Collectors too. And I always wonder, I had Christina Baker Klein and Ann Burt on, I guess about a month ago, talking about their new thriller. And I'm always so rapt hearing about a dual creative process. And it always sounds very smooth. I think a lot of us came up writing solo and have always thought of it as a very isolating act, except you're surrounded by all these imaginary people who talk all the time and never leave you alone. So I actually prefer to be isolated. But then it occurred to me, like, being in a writing room, even if it's a writing room of two, must be like having company all the time.
It is. And you get out of like the ditches much easier, more easily. So there's, when you get stuck in a plot thing, when it's just you, it takes a lot longer to get out of that. But when you're working with someone, you have two minds working and seeing it from different perspective. And I feel like the spring back is much faster.
That's interesting. I think it may be the authors who rely more on their editors, or that's kind of like a Fitzgerald Max Perkins kind of dynamic. Like maybe in the olden days when you were seeing your editor every day at lunch and having martinis, it was more like that. But now we writers just need each other. And meanwhile, while we're discussing this, Victoria said, I was intrigued by this interview simply because of the gorgeous cover. So unlike most book covers nowadays, and I think that's such a great comment on how important book covers are and how much we owe our book designers especially when they really get it right. Thank you, Victoria. We appreciate that. Can you tell us what's next, Allie? Or are you going to keep that?
I know. I'm very happy to share, and thank you for asking that question. I'm currently working on a book about Edith Wharton's time in Paris during World War I, when she was helping transport Belgian children who were refugees during the war to hostels that she created outside of Paris. And she gave them shelter. They were fed, and there were lace schools there in which she was teaching them a skill so that after the war ended, that they would be able to have that and sustain themselves in the future. So that's part of the book. And then there's a dual timeline with her country home, The Mount, which is just outside Boston. And in 2005, their pursuit to be able to get the existing volumes of her library back to their bookshelves there, and what happened and how they were successful in doing that.
I love it. One of the things I love about your historical fiction is how you shine a spotlight into unilluminated corners and then make it so personable and bring it to life for all of us. I appreciate that so greatly. It's the art and the sort of fairy trick of the historical novelist. And I wonder, to cut you off, but I'm wondering what you would say to your readers and our audience here about Missing Pages. Like, what do you hope that they take from this new book?
It's a good question. I think what I hope they take away from this book is that, when experiencing grief, there's so many ways to channel that and to create legacy. I mean, when we think of Eleanor Widener, how she created this lasting, monument to her son with this beautiful room, which I said feels so alive. And then on top of that, how Harry's name, is probably mentioned dozens of times every day, because every, Harvard tour guide shares this legend when they stand at the steps of the library and tell this story about how he might have gone back for a book, but even if he didn't, his mother built this in his honor. So to think about, how life is, no matter how long we live, life is very brief, and how can we contribute to have some sort of legacy to make sure we leave something beautiful behind. And if we have a terrible loss, to think of ways. I mean, obviously very few people have the, ability to create a monument of the size of Widener Library, but there's many ways to keep someone that we love alive and channeling our grief in a very productive way. To me, I think that's a big part of this book.
I love that. We had a reader say earlier that her Nana and her mom always chime in when she plants her garden. And I feel like that is exactly the kind of living monument that you're talking about that keeps our loved ones close to us. Allie, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about The Missing Pages. You guys, you have such a treat in store for you if you haven't read it. And if you have read it, then you can read it again. But please buy at least 1, 3, 5 copies of this beautiful book and give it to people you know who love books, because this is the book for people who love books. And my sweet good luck with the rest of your tour, which actually kicks off with me on Friday at the Harvard Bookstore and then goes on from there. Can't wait to see you. And everybody, thank you so much for joining us on The Blaze.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jenna. It was such a pleasure, and I can't wait to see you tomorrow.
Always a joy. Thank you, everybody. Happy reading. We'll see you again soon.